One woman walks into a room and the room holds its breath. The other, she enters like a storm, bold, brilliant, unfiltered. And suddenly, the air feels charged. Kate Middleton, the monarchy's silent star, raised in restraint, polished. In protocol, a woman built for the crown but never desperate to wear it. And then Meghan Markle, actress, advocate, outsider, a woman who was never afraid of the spotlight until it turned on her. They were supposed to be sisters. Instead, they became something far more dangerous, mirrors, because what happens when a woman used to being the center of attention joins an institution built around someone else? This isn't just a story about two-duchesses. It's about what happens when royalty meets reality and no one is ready for the fallout. Let's begin. Before the headlines, before Oprah, before Spare, there was a moment when it all could have gone differently. When Meghan Markle first entered the royal scene, the world was dazzled. American, mixed race, outspoken, accomplished, a woman with a voice and no fear of using it. She wasn't just marrying a prince, she was marrying into a system. A centuries-old institution built on discretion, duty, and control. And then there was Kate Middleton, the poised commoner who waited in silence, played by the rules, and became queen-in-waiting without ever saying a word out of place. If Meghan was the modern fairy tale, Kate was the traditional one, the palace's perfect answer to a public craving stability. For a moment, the press treated it like a dream, the Fab Four: William, Kate, Harry, Meghan. But beneath the photo ops and polite smiles, something colder was brewing. During their early joint appearances, tension was visible if you knew where to look. Kate, polished and serene. Meghan, expressive and electric. They stood side by side, but never seemed to meet. The British press made their choice quickly. Headlines praised Catherine's regal restraint while painting Meghan as difficult, diva, demanding. It was as if the story had already been written and Meghan had walked in on someone else's ending. Inside the palace, the contrast was sharper. Kate moved in silence, made no missteps, never leaked, never shouted. Meghan asked questions, challenged tradition, wanted to know why she couldn't wear certain colors, why she had to walk behind, why her voice suddenly had limits. Admiration turned into comparison. Comparison bred resentment. And soon, the quiet distance between Catherine and Meghan became a silent war, not of words but of image. The spotlight didn't just illuminate them, it separated them, because in the royal world, there is only room for one leading lady. And the stage had already been set, but Meghan never learned how to play second. Long before Meghan stepped into the palace gates, Kate Middleton had already mastered the game. Her story was one of patience. She met William at university, waded through breakups, endured tabloid mockery. Weighty Katie, they called her, and yet, she never wavered. No interviews, no scandals, no demands, just quiet loyalty and a smile the press never questioned. By the time she became Duchess of Cambridge in 2011, she was already what the crown needed: steady, silent, secure, the perfect future queen. And then, Meghan. In 2016, she arrived like a breath of fresh or to some, unwelcome air. An American actress, divorced, biracial, confident, articulate. She didn't just walk into royal life, she lit it up. Her first public appearance with Harry? A global headline. Her first speech as Duchess? Poised, powerful. She was natural with crowds, camera ready, and unafraid of causes that stirred controversy. But that's not how royalty works. Inside the firm, attention is currency, and Meghan was cashing in too fast. At first, Meghan may have expected a sisterhood, a warm welcome from the woman who had once been the outsider herself. But Kate, she was cautious, guarded, cool in demeanor, whether by nature or necessity. They were polite, even cordial, but rarely close. And that distance only grew. Then came the incidents. The infamous bridesmaid dress drama. One side claimed Meghan made Kate cry, the other that it was the reverse. To this day, no definitive answer. Only silence from Kate. And silence, in the royal family, often wins. There was Tiara Gate, reports that Meghan clashed with palace staff over which jewels she could wear. Allegations of diva behavior. Meghan said she was simply asking for clarity. The palace framed it as entitlement. And then came the body language breakdowns. Royal watchers obsessed over every glance, every gesture. Kate's tight smiles, Meghan's strained posture. Public appearances became psychological chess matches. While Kate was praised for rising above, Meghan was blamed for breaking rank. Kate said nothing, and that was her power. Meghan spoke out, and that became her curse. Behind the scenes, staff whispered of tension, allegations of bullying, aides quitting. The tabloids fed on it, painting Meghan as a storm the palace had never seen and Kate as the eye of that storm, untouched and untouchable. Meghan's frustration grew. How could she be villainized for speaking her mind, while Kate was glorified for saying nothing at all? It wasn't just about personality. It was about positioning. In the monarchy, image is everything, and Meghan was learning that in this institution, the crown doesn't need two dazzling stars, only one. And it had already chosen. By 2020, the fairy tale had fractured. Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties, but not from the spotlight. What followed wasn't retreat. It was rebranding. Netflix, Spotify, Vogue, Oprah. Meghan didn't vanish. She curated. The Harry and Meghan docuseries became a glossy, intimate, and calculated strike at the monarchy. But for all the soft lighting and slow-motion shots of chickens and children, one shadow loomed over the entire production. Catherine. The camera never named her as a villain, but the implication was clear. Stiff smiles, cold shoulders, institutional silence. The footage was rich with symbols. Meghan crying alone, while the royals looked polished and unmoved. Every image whispered, she was never one of them. Then came the Oprah interview, a bombshell wrapped in empathy. Meghan told her side. The palace stripped Archie of a title. Concerns were raised about his skin color, and in one breath that echoed around the world, she revisited the old bridesmaid dress saga. Did you make Kate cry? Oprah asked. No, Meghan replied. The reverse happened. Pause. In that one moment, Kate's decades-long silence cracked, not because she spoke, but because someone else did. But Catherine didn't respond. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't do an interview. She did what she'd always done. Walked out in a coat dress, smiled at the cameras, and said nothing. And somehow, that silence spoke louder than Meghan's words. Then came Spare Harry's explosive memoir. He revealed text messages from Kate that painted her as passive-aggressive. He described tension, distance, and the infamous baby brain comment. He portrayed Meghan as misunderstood and Kate as frigid, unwelcoming. But the public didn't react the way they expected. Instead of sympathy, many saw strategy. And the more Meghan and Harry tried to explain, the more Kate's dignity seemed to grow. Because in the monarchy, silence isn't weakness, it's armor. Royal experts began to ask uncomfortable questions. Was this really a feud, or was it envy? Kate had the Windsor estate, the coveted title, the public's admiration, and yes, her husband's unwavering loyalty to her. Meghan and Harry lived in Nottingham Cottage, barely bigger than a London flat. She was criticized for her wardrobe while Kate recycled hers and got praise. Everything Meghan did was scrutinized. Everything Kate didn't do was celebrated. And still, the cameras kept returning to Catherine. Even Meghan's defenders began to notice the fixation. In every interview, Kate was mentioned. In every headline, she appeared even when she hadn't said a word. Meghan didn't want privacy. One commentator said she wanted control, and when she couldn't manipulate the British press, she built her own media empire to rewrite the narrative. But it didn't work, not entirely, because Catherine's refusal to engage became its own kind of power play. While Meghan cried on camera, Catherine simply carried on, and the contrast became unshakable. Inside the palace, courtiers whispered that Meghan wasn't just resentful, she was obsessed. Not with the crown, but with who it was already destined for. Because in the end, this was never just about status. It was about position. And Catherine, by nature or nurture, understood the royal game. Meghan wanted to rewrite the rules, and maybe she thought Kate would help her do it. When she didn't, admiration turned to rivalry. Rivalry to bitterness, and bitterness to a war fought not in words but in silence, sequins, and carefully timed documentaries. So we ask, was this a royal rift, a power struggle, or something more unsettling? Is this rivalry, or is it fixation? By 2022, the strategy was no longer subtle. Netflix trailers dropped hours before royal engagements. Exclusive interviews aired the night before Kate's major state events. Headlines surged in perfect synchronicity with palace milestones. Was it coincidence or choreography? Royal watchers began to notice patterns. A Zara blazer on Meghan identical to one Kate wore days earlier. Meghan photographed at a charity in a black wide-brimmed hat, hauntingly reminiscent of Diana's morning look. Even her poses in official portraits echoed Catherine's, arms crossed, chin slightly down, gaze tilted. Online sleuths dissected it all. Side-by-sides filled Twitter threads, YouTube breakdowns, TikTok speculations, and every post, whether defending Meghan or elevating Kate, kept the rivalry alive, kept Meghan chasing. Inside the palace, one revelation cut deeper than the rest. Harry the Spare, the rebel, once admired Kate profoundly, not in a romantic way, but in a way that stung nonetheless. He'd seen in Kate the very qualities he wished he could embody: composure, grace, unshakable loyalty. She represented the royal ideal, the life he both rejected and secretly respected. And Meghan, she knew it, not from a single comment, but from all the unspoken comparisons. Every smile Kate gave the press, every flattering headline, every time William's wife was praised for being everything a royal should be, Meghan heard what wasn't being said. And you're not. She had the voice, the beauty, the charisma, but she couldn't win the crowd. Not in Britain, not in the palace, not even in Harry's old world, because Catherine didn't ask for adoration. She earned it by being exactly what the crown demanded. And Meghan, the woman who had built a career on applause, was now performing to a room that had already left. The pressure twisted inward. Post-royal exit, Meghan's tone sharpened. Interviews became more pointed, references more direct. Victimhood became a brand. And yet, the more she spoke, the more she seemed unheard. Her anger wasn't loud, but it was layered. You could hear it in the breath before the answers, in the silence after a clipped smile, in the moments when she said, "I was silenced. I was isolated. I was misunderstood." But what if she wasn't misunderstood? What if she was simply unaccepted? In the end, maybe it wasn't the crown she wanted, not the titles, not the palaces, not the protocol, but something softer, something more human. The love Catherine receives, without even asking, because in the Windsor world, affection is a currency given, not earned. And for Meghan, the outsider, it was a debt she could never repay. So she broke, not in public, but behind polished press releases and smiling photo ops. Bitterness crept into the edges of her brand. Her voice became more controlled but colder, more scripted but sharp. The Duchess, who once radiated warmth, had learned how to wield coolness, and yet, the more she distanced herself, the more Catherine glowed, wearing Diana's earrings, stepping into her role as Princess of Wales with quiet confidence. No interviews, no counterattacks, just presence. And in that contrast, Meghan saw the truth. She couldn't win the game, because the crown never needed her to play. It had already crowned its queen. The storm passed, but the sky never quite cleared. After Oprah, after Spare, after the Netflix docuseries, there was silence, not from Meghan but from the world watching her. She didn't disappear. She pivoted. A podcast with Spotify, a Netflix deal still running, rumors of a memoir, a lifestyle brand, even political aspirations. The Duchess of Sussex was no longer royal. She was a media mogul in the making. But the empire she tried to build wasn't made of stone. It was made of storytelling. And when the story started to fray, so did the brand. Spotify dropped her. Her interviews became memes. The public, once divided, now seemed exhausted. Too curated, they said. Too calculated. Authenticity had been the pitch, but control had become the product. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Kate rose, quietly, steadily, relentlessly. She took on more engagements, grew into her role as Princess of Wales, wore Diana's jewelry not as tribute, but as inheritance. The tabloids, once obsessed with Meghan, now called Catherine the monarchy's last hope, the crown's saving grace, the future queen. She never gave an interview, never made a statement, never corrected the record. And yet, she won. Because silence, in royal circles, is not absence, it's strategy. And in the battle for public opinion, Catherine never needed to speak because the crowd had already decided who they wanted to listen to. For Meghan, the pain may have been real, the loneliness, the exclusion, the racism, the betrayal. But, in trying to own her narrative, she created something polished and distant, something sleek, but not sacred, because every time she spoke, it reminded people that Kate didn't need to. And in that contrast, silence versus spectacle, the public made its choice. Kate became regal. Meghan became reactive. One woman glided forward untouched. The other fought, explained, corrected, and somehow lost ground each time she did. Even supporters began to ask, was the crown cruel? Or did Meghan misunderstand it? Maybe both, because in trying to control the story to frame herself as the heroine, the victim, the revolution, Meghan may have done the one thing no royal can afford. She tried to win the narrative. And in doing so, she wrote herself out of the legacy. Not because she wasn't powerful, not because she wasn't right, but because she forgot. In the monarchy, the crown speaks last, and it never speaks loudly. This was never just about tiaras and tabloid tears. Not really. It was about two women divisions of womanhood standing on opposite ends of a centuries-old stage. Catherine, power through poise. Meghan, power through voice. One was molded by tradition, the other shaped by disruption. And when they collided inside the same gilded system, only one could be queen. But maybe the real tragedy isn't who wore the crown, it's that we ever made them rivals to begin with. Because what if Meghan didn't misread the rules of royalty, but simply refused to play a game that demanded silence over selfhood? What if her mistake wasn't rebellion but expectation? Expectation that she could change an institution without it changing her first. Was jealousy at the heart of it all? Is that too simple or exactly right? Did Meghan try to outshine someone who was never even seeking the spotlight? Or was the palace always going to protect the woman it had already chosen? Could two powerful women ever coexist under one crown? That may be the question no monarchy or media knows how to answer. Because when the dust settled, two images remained: Kate waving silently from the palace steps, composed, polished, untouchable, and Meghan behind a camera crew, still telling her story, still trying to be heard. One woman speaks, the other is heard, but only one of them will ever be queen.